Right, there we go. In the right place this time. Right, there we go. In the right place this time. So, good job for me for getting my own schedule before I even started. Alright, so from now until 6 o'clock, we're going to be looking at some PC games from the 90s. These are mostly going to be shareware games. Let me turn that down. So these are mostly going to be shareware games, probably from Apogee, largely. Later 3D Realms. So, let's just jump right in with a few. And like the emulator I was using earlier on, streaming doesn't seem to work very nicely with DOSBox in full screen mode, so I'll be using windowed mode for the most part. So apologies if that's a massive inconvenience, but I'm sure you can deal with it. So this first game is called Biomenace. Alright.
Minimize the background stuff and make it look really busy.
Okay. Alright, for those not particularly familiar with Apogee's work in the 90s, they are a company who released a whole lot of shareware games. The most famous of which is probably Wolfenstein 3D, which is sort of the progenitor of modern first-person shoot-em-ups. But a lot of their other stuff was really good as well. There's a lot of sort of console-style stuff. A lot of platform games, action games, that kind of thing. And the nice thing about a lot of them is that they ran on pretty modest PC hardware. Certainly in the early days they used relatively low spec requirements. So for example, this one is running in 16 color EGA mode rather than the 256 color VGA mode that was a little bit more demanding but looks a lot better. I mean, it certainly looks fine enough. It does have a lot of those distinctive EGA palette things about it though. It wasn't very good at skin tone, so one thing, everyone looks like they're very, very sunburned. But anyway, Biomenace has some sort of plot that isn't really relevant to the whole thing. It's just you going after some mad scientist. That was the plot of most of Apogee's games at the time. Very similar to Duke Nukem that was around at the same time. Also an Apogee game, incidentally. Oops. And this time you get to play a guy with a badass moustache. And the aim in each level of this one is to find these sort of crystal shard things that will unlock that force field that we just saw. You release the hostages, they give you the key to the next level, and you proceed to the next level, and that's that basically. Oh dear. The way the shareware model tended to work with these games was that you'd get one episode of the game for free, which would be a little bit limited in some way. It might not have all the weapons or all the enemies or all the different power-ups that are available or something like that. And then by registering it and paying a fee, you would get your hands on the rest of the game. So in most cases, they tended to have 3 episodes altogether. Sometimes those episodes were sold separately from one another. And more often than not, you just pay the once and get 2 more episodes. And that was the case right up until things like Doom and Duke Nukem 3D. There are a couple of minor exceptions to the formula. There's things like Wolfenstein 3D actually had a total of 6 episodes altogether that you could buy in 2 lots of 3 if you wanted to, or all at once. As far as I'm aware, there weren't any that were just 2 episodes though. Oh, and Blakestone, which we'll look at in a little while as well, that had 6 episodes. The RPG games are pretty cool in that very few of them were sort of straightforward run and gun things. There was often a sort of very strong action adventure element to them as well. So like in the case of this one, there's lots of sort of going back and forth and finding keys and secret areas and that sort of thing. Did I go in here? I just like the unnecessary gore in this. It's ridiculous. Because of the whole 16 colour thing, the fact the whole thing looks very unrealistic anyway, the gore just looks even more ridiculous. But it was a stylistic choice they went for, along with a sort of mulleted hero. But in many ways, these games were sort of an evolution of the early arcade adventures they tended to be called back in the 8-bit era. Those would often involve sort of going from a single screen to single screen at a time, rather than the big scrolling level. But the principle was the same. You'd have a sort of standard conventions like shooting things and jumping on platforms and so on, but there'd be a strong exploration element to it as well. It's not quite the same as what we now know as Metroidvania, in that there's sort of one big map that you go around. It's still obviously level based, but within those different levels there's a lot of exploration to do and a lot of secrets to uncover and that sort of thing. I guess you could sort of relate it to things like Yoshi's Island that we were looking at in the previous session. So sort of there is an obvious best route through the levels, but there might be branches in the path as you go through. There might be places you don't have to go, where you can collect extra things, extra weapons, power-ups, score items. And on to the next level. Love the enemy design in this. It's sort of silly and cartoony, but there's sort of a hint of sinister about it as well. I guess this game has got a touch of like elevator action about it as well, with all the doors you have to open and so on. A lot of these doors aren't necessary to open, they've just got score items in them, and like a lot of games of this type, your score isn't particularly relevant, but it depends how you play it, really. And because these are PC games, it's very easy to sort of spam a quick save function and sort of just basically brute force your way past the difficult bit, but I still find it actually quite a bit more satisfying to play these. I don't know if it was originally intended to sort of be played in one session, see how far you can get on a single set of lives, but I find these games tend to work pretty well if you treat them like that. Even the later ones, even things like the first person shooters like Wolfenstein and Blakestone. That's how we deal with those. He went down a lot easier than I thought. So a lot of Apogee's early games tended to follow this format. It's like even the ones that were sort of CGA graphics and PC speaker sound, they'd have this sort of nice non-linear feel to them, where you'd be exploring and finding keys and solving puzzles, as well as, I mean, obviously the puzzles in this aren't particularly difficult or anything, but it's kind of a step above just sort of running from left to right and shooting things as you go. How do we get at them? It's not working, is it? RoboPal. Oops. So some stuff does respawn. Most stuff seems to respawn. That's unfortunate. But I don't think you have to go and collect the items again or anything. Oh, it's right before the checkpoint when I died as well. You go through there? No. I kind of like this one because it's one that I remember playing as a kid, but it's not one of Apogee's better known ones. I mean, when you hear about people talking about old Apogee games these days, it tends to be things like Commander Keen, Wolfenstein 3D, maybe looking back at stuff like the old Catacomb games, even though that wasn't Apogee, that was Soft Disk, but Yeah, I like this one because it's just got a slightly different feel to a lot of their other stuff. Ooh. You got a big gun. You again. That's a nasty place. Right, so keycard goes in there. We get the hostage. Dr. Mangle. See, plot. Who says action games can't have plot? Alright, how can you get up there? Stand on this? Nope. It's just an enemy up there anyway. Alright, next level. See, despite just being 16 colours, this is actually a pretty nice looking game. The trouble with EGA mode is that, unlike other 16 colour systems at the time, things like, say, the Atari ST or something like that, the reason EGA's got such a distinctive look to it, and why 16 colour games on PC don't tend to look as good as like old Atari ST and Amiga games, is the actual colour palette that they could draw those 16 colours from was much, much smaller on PC than it was on, say, the Atari ST. Which means you get sort of the same shades appearing all the time. If we consider the ST, that had a palette of 512 colours to choose from. And it could display 16 of those on screen at once. You could actually display more on screen if you did a bit of clever programming trickery, or if you had an Atari STE, but I think the STE actually had a bigger palette as well, if I remember rightly. I want to say 4,086 colours. I could be wrong, but anyway. Fact is, EGA had a shitty palette to choose from, which is why you get those sort of nuclear skin tones. But there's certain things it looks pretty good on, like it's pretty good at doing trees, as you can see. So sort of those shades of green and orange and brown and yellow, those all work really nicely to do a pretty convincing effect with relatively minimal use of colour. Well, that's not useful. Oh, you're invincible. That's useful. Presumably just while the music lasts. Yeah, I know, right? I was just about to mention that. The whole thing with FM synth. Back in the day, I remember being really jealous of people who had things like Sound Blaster All 32s and Gravis Ultrasound. But now that's sort of the norm for MIDI sound. It's got a lovely sort of nostalgia for the FM sound. It's And in fact, in a lot of PC games where you have the option of emulating either an MT32 or an ad lib, I will tend to go for the ad lib, just because a lot of them were designed to sound a lot better on those cards. There's exceptions, of course. Things like Sierra Adventures sound absolutely amazing on an MT32 if you've got a good voice set or a suitable emulator. But yeah, for something like this, you need the joy of FM, if only for those jangly sound effects. Is that thing going to jump up and eat me? Oh no, I don't have a key. This is from that era when sort of environments didn't really have to make sense either. I mean, a lot of this is reasonably realistic environments, which I still really like in a game. Being able to sort of shoot aliens in a relatable environment, but then you've got things like those elevators that are just floating outside and doesn't really make any sense, but it doesn't need to. The reason it's there is because it's fun. Oh, harsh. This game seems to be pretty generous with the extra lives, at least, otherwise I'd be more annoyed about what just happened there. Use some grenades. Oh god. Right. Try again. Oh, things seem to respawn over time rather than when you die. That's helpful, I guess. Just the random dead bodies everywhere. It's pretty common set dressing for Apogee games. Oh, harsh. Harsh colours intersection. So what did that shard do? Right, well that side moving. $50,000 points. And that's it. Must be something else up here, I guess. Whole bunch of keys, that'll do. Oh, that's just mean. Oh, and there's the colour sequence. But that trap's already sprung, so I don't think I can do anything with that, can I? Red, pink, blue, green, turquoise. Nope, can't do anything with that now. Oh well. Humorous natural dialogue. Yeah, I know. There are a bunch of composers from this era who are like really well regarded now, but a lot of what they did was just really simple riffs and patterns like this. So there's a guy called Bobby Prince who I don't think worked on this, but he might have done actually. Can we see in the menu? No. Oh. No credits. All right. Well, anyway, a guy called Bobby Prince did work for a lot of Apogee games, and he was very fond of like sort of your traditional 12-bar blues and that kind of thing. So you listen to all his stuff from games like Rise of the Triad and Blake Stone and such like, and they're all the same. They're all very simple pieces of music. I mean, they're effective, but you know, do something else once in a while. Jump through there without? Yeah, we'll do. I'll take it. Those things are really irritating. Last life. You watch me need to get in that door at the top now. Oh. Okay. Now we're dead. Okay. That's Biomenace. Or the first episode of Biomenace, anyway. Episode 1, Dr. Mangle's Lab. So, moving on to some other stuff. Let's just pop that out of the way. Moving on to some other stuff that 3D Realms did for us. Let's have a look at Blake Stone now. This is one of my favourites. This is a game that came out about, I think it's about a week before Doom is the story behind it. And the trouble was it was based off a sort of enhanced version of the Wolfenstein 3D engine. Whereas Doom was obviously much more impressive than that. So here we go from episode 4 of this one, because I've finished the other ones quite recently. I'm going to pop it on level 2 for now. And again, there's a story for this, but it doesn't really matter all that much. All you need to know is that you need to get through various levels, shoot lots of things, and find treasure. But the cool thing Blake Stone had above things like Wolfenstein 3D and stuff is it had a lot more in the way of sort of interactive objects. So there are things like food dispensers that you could actually sort of use. There were people you could talk to. Some of the characters were friendly, and they give you stuff if you talk to them. And then there were the destructible bits of scenery and secret rooms and all sorts of fun stuff like that. So oh, and probably the biggest addition of Wolfenstein is an auto map. Very, very helpful, because it not only showed you where you'd been on the level, it also gave you like a breakdown of the things you hadn't found yet. So things like the secrets and how many informants you'd left alive and so on. So this is one of the friendly characters, for example. So if you just grill him for information repeatedly, it will give you some food tokens and some ammunition. And I just shot one of them. But yeah, if you look on the map screen, you've got an overall floor rating and a mission rating, and that's the calculation based on things like how much treasure you found, how many enemies you killed, how many of the informants you left alive. Things like these gold bars on the floor, these are worth loads of points, and they contribute to the total points value you have on each level. So if you want to go for a complete 100% clear on this, which is pretty challenging, you need to make sure you track down all the secret parts of the level, because those will have some hidden enemies and some hidden treasury bits and all sorts of things. And so yeah, lots to do. But if you don't want to bother with that, then you can just try and work your way through a bit at a time. Oop. And just try and complete the levels. That's fine too. Like I was saying, that Biomenace had all sorts of different ways to handle the level, so you could go exploring and find secret stuff. Ooh, ooh, you're new. Yeah, this was the other thing with sort of registered versions of Shareware games, is that each episode would tend to introduce a couple of new things, so there'd be something there to surprise you. So in the case of first-person shooters, it was usually new types of enemies. So the pattern for first-person shooters tended to be that they would withhold one of the weapons from the Shareware version, then you'd only get that in the registered version. So in the case of Doom, they withheld the last two, so you couldn't get, for example, the gross. You couldn't get the plasma gun and the BFG 9000. It was a similar sort of situation in this. I forget exactly what the most powerful weapons in this were, but yeah, there were certainly one or two withheld until the later episodes. Well, you notice things in this game like switches and doors that are opening when you open other doors and that kind of thing. This was all new to this as well. This was stuff that wasn't possible in the original Wolfenstein engine. But some of the enhancements added for Blakestone included that. And obviously the textured floors and ceilings as well. You forget what a big deal that was back at the time. But yeah, the original Wolfenstein didn't have floors and ceilings. It just had coloured patches. So it was just like cubes floating in space. And just this made things look a whole lot more natural. Like I say, it's a real shame that this game didn't sort of get much attention, because it came out so close to Doom that it was just completely passed over, just because Doom was so much more advanced than this and so much more immediately obviously impressive, that it was sort of difficult to justify hyping this up too much. Obviously, with the benefit of hindsight, you can sort of take this on its own merits now, which is nice. But you know, it's a shame it didn't really get the recognition it was due back in the day. Because it's a good game. It's actually one of my favourite first-person shooters. So even though it's lacking sort of modern conveniences like mouse look and WSAD controls and that sort of thing, it's like I don't mind too much, because it's not designed around those things, so you don't miss them too much if they're not there. I'm just playing with the arrow keys and spacebar to open doors, control to shoot, hold down Alt to strafe. So you can still strafe. It's just a little bit more awkward than doing it with a standard WSAD setup. But like I say, because the game wasn't designed in full 3D, it's still a basic raycasting engine with sort of cube-shaped walls. you don't really miss those things too much because the game wasn't designed for things like circle strafing and such like. Oh, what the hell are you? You're a big puddle of water. Sorry, you're a fluid alien. Get away from me with your fluid. So although this game went a bit underappreciated at the time, it did do well enough to spawn a sequel. I must confess I haven't actually tried yet, as I'm yet to completely finish this one. But yeah, it got a sequel called Planet Strike that again sort of kind of built on this with a few extra new features. Like you had the mini map on the screen all the time instead of having to pop it up, and there's a slightly different focus on the gameplay that you're doing in each level. But other than that, it was the same basic engine and the same basic way that the game worked. Oh yeah, one-way doors as well. Right, out of dungeon crawlers. In fact, these kind of raycasting... My face is not a fluid alien. These sort of raycasting first-person shooters had quite a lot in common with dungeon crawlers, just because of the way they're designed, with the maps being all block-based. As your average dungeon crawler these days is still built on a grid-based map, like one of these games. The only difference is in this one you've got sort of full freedom to turn and face any angle rather than moving by 90 degrees. And you can move distances other than one block at a time, that kind of thing. Also, these aren't turn-based, obviously, but that should probably go without saying. So the aim in each level of Blakestone is pretty simple. All you got to do is you need to find a red keycard, and that allows you to use the elevators at the next level, which you then hop in, press the button, get a quick breakdown of what you've done. I haven't done all that well on that floor, but the other nice thing you can do on this is you can come back to yeah, I suppose that's true. The other nice thing on this one is that it's you can actually go back to floors that you've been on previously. So if, for example, there was sort of an enemy confrontation you were struggling with and you find some better weapons later on, you can always go back to an earlier floor. Or if you're low on health or ammunition or something like that, you can go on to the next level, get some pickups, because there's usually some fairly generous pickups towards the start of each level. And then see how you get on from there. But I mean, again, the game is designed so you don't have to do that. Oh. Get off. Who's shooting at me? You are. Ooh. Yeah, so there's no need to do that if you don't want to. But if you do want to sort of perfect the game and get 100% clear, I don't think there's any particularly special reward for doing that other than having a much higher score at the end. But I suppose you could sort of screenshot it and brag about it online these days if you really wanted to, but I don't know too many people other than me who would care if you pointed out that you completed Blakestone Aliens of Gold with 100% clear, but you know, if you do choose to do that, then do be sure to share the news with me, because I'll appreciate it, certainly. We're out of ammunition. And so in the grand tradition of these old first-person shooters, you've got this desperation weapon, I think they call it these days. In Wolfenstein was a knife, so you had to get right up close, and it wasn't terribly practical in that game. This one you got this auto charge pistol, which is a bit more practical because at least you can hit things from range with it. But it's not great against some of the more powerful enemies. It is silent as well, so in theory you're supposed to be able to do like a sort of stealth playthrough with it, but you know, these kind of games weren't really built for stealth. They weren't designed for it. But if you wanted to go through and try to kill everything using nothing but the auto charge pistol, you can do. And I'm dead. So one way this does things a little bit differently from Wolfenstein is that in Wolfenstein when you died it would put you back at the start of the level, it would reset the whole level, and it would also strip off all your weapons, any sort of power-ups and upgrades you'd collected, and it was a real pain. So they changed that a little bit in this, so that instead of just losing everything, it would just put you back to the state you were in at the start of that level, which is a much more friendly way of doing things. It still inconveniences you a bit in that you have to go and do all the level again, unless you've been spamming the quick save function like a big wuss. But I hate these things. Oh dear, dead already. I'm gonna not go that way. Like I say, this is another game that has a save function, but I like to play in single sessions like this. So, because you've got lives, you've got score, you might as well sort of use them for what they were designed for, if you like, and play it through. See how far you can get on a single set of lives. You get extra lives at certain boundaries of score as well, so your score does have a use if you're playing it in that way. I just find it quite fun to play it that way because it's so different to how we play first-person shooters these days, whether they're sort of checkpoint-heavy Call of Duties or if they're something like Half-Life where you're sort of almost encouraged to spam the quick save function, it feels like. But yeah, it just gives it sort of an old-school console game feel about it that I really like. Yeah, it's lovely imagery in these games of wandering around just eating random bits of meat off the floor to restore your health. It's not quite as disgusting as Wolfenstein where you could drink pools of blood off the floor when you got below a certain boundary of health, but it's still kind of gross. Oop. Can we get in there? Let's see if we can find a secret wall. Nope. Nope. This was standard practice in old first-person games as well. I was just wandering along, tapping the spacebar on walls, trying to find secret doors. Oh, there we go. There's one. Because you see, there's no real way to distinguish them from the normal walls either, which is what made it a bit of a challenge. But you can often work it out with a bit of logic. So if you look at the map and see, right, okay, so there's a gap to the south. So if I have a look on the south wall, chances are one of these walls will move, except not in this case. Okay, I'll give you that one. Let's try these walls. Unlikely, but worth a go. There we go. So yeah, that was clearly just meant to demonstrate how it subverts your expectations at times. Alright, lots of lovely points. Oh yeah, totally. Yeah, it was like a little... I can't remember if it was in the manual or not. It was definitely in the manual for Spear of Destiny. But yeah, when you got below 10% health, any of the pools of blood on the floor, including the ones that sort of had bits of bones and stuff in it, you could just walk over them and you get this horrible slurping sound, and you get like 1% of your health back for each one that you picked up. But yeah, totally, it was gross. You see, there's a few randomized elements in this as well. So that scientist was a bad guy last time, but he's not this time. So you're a bad guy, though. There we go. I actually really like the level design in this because although it's all based on blocks, they've made a real effort to sort of make each level thematically appropriate, I guess is the way to put it. And so that's especially noticeable in things like the sort of the levels that are supposed to be in offices and such like, but you can sort of see that there are areas that are supposed to be sort of where the crew hangs out, and there's even stuff like toilets in there. So they haven't got sprites for actual toilet cubicles and stuff like that, but you'll go in a room and there'll be like a drain in the corner, and there'll be a guard standing in front of it, and there'll be sort of yellow stains on the floor and that kind of thing. And so they went to the effort to sort of try and make the environments as convincing as they could within the limitations of the engine, which I think is a really nice touch. Out of ammo again, Jesus. No. Oh. It was going so well. The annoying thing about these sort of socket things that the electric monsters pop out of is there doesn't seem to be a way to deactivate them. You've just got to sort of leg it through as quickly as possible. Ooh. That's not always entirely practical. There's sometimes a way around them though. I might have inadvertently stumbled on a way around it from the look of things. Unless this is just another way that's gonna bring me back into that same place. No, we might have got around them. Right, there's the locked door for the key I found, so all I've got to do is just not go through that one door, in theory. One with the zappy things, isn't it? Right. Okay, let's go get that key again. Let's see if we can remember where all those secret doors are as well. I do like the sound effects in this. They're sort of such sort of 50s sci-fi sounds. That ray gun that sort of goes wow. And there's the old ad-lib helping out with some of the sound effects there. Right, one key card. And there was a secret door somewhere along there. There we go. The gore. Such good gore. Proper ridiculous Mortal Kombat style gore that doesn't look in the slightest bit realistic. And when developers would put their own sort of voluntary age ratings on their games, primarily as a marketing thing. So they say, oh yes, this game is rated PC-13, profound carnage. Yeah, okay, whatever. I think Doom actually resisted doing that, if I remember rightly. You might have had a thing on the title screen, but right. No, I'm okay then. Yeah. Oh.
I was only going to go to get rid of this.
Oh, you're kidding. It wasn't even the right bloody door. Right, so well, we got an extra life. Right, I don't believe there was a locked door in here. I'll just go through there quickly just to map it anyway. No. So there's a yellow locked door somewhere that we haven't found yet. Yeah, we've not been this way yet. Ah, there's the green key. I love how fast you can run in these games as well. I think someone calculated at one point you're running about 40 miles an hour or something ridiculous like that. Oh, of course, there's some of these bastards in here. And I've shot a scientist. Whoops. And I'm dead. This is where you're probably wishing I'd stop being so stubborn and use the save function. But, well, when we run out of this last life, we will move on to something else. Also, we should be able to do that whole bit a lot quicker now anyway. So, it can't go that way. What colour is that one? Gold. There we go. Absolute mastery of that part of the level, clearly. Right. Let's go this way. Alright, so this is called Blakestone Aliens of Gold. Yeah, it's an old first-person shooter from a company called Apogee, the people who did Wolfenstein 3D. So it's running on the same engine as Wolfenstein 3D, but it's sort of an enhanced version. It does floors and ceilings. But it's got sort of things like interactive elements and people you can talk to and items you can collect and so on. So like you can talk to these scientists. There's, with my brains and your brawn, will I make an excellent team, and so on. But yeah, this is a really old first-person shooter that I always used to really enjoy back in the day, but I only ever had the shareware version of. But this is the full registered version, so this is episode 4 we're playing right now. Because it's an early 90s first-person shooter, there is always detritus everywhere. It's set dressing to make it look more like you're moving. Some of it you can pick up and do stuff with. Lumps of meat restore your health and that sort of thing. Other stuff is just there just to sort of be stuff on the floor, basically. Try not to get zapped by the twats this time. No. Oh, bastard. It is like Turbo Slagon. Yes. Less clicking on the... What are the buttons you had in that? You had the plotter and that kind of thing. That scientist was a bad guy. He was shooting at me, so I killed him. Anyway, that is Blake Stone. So let's move on to something a bit different. Right, let's try Paganitsu. This one's a really old one. This one is a sort of puzzle adventure type thing, I guess. So it's got really old, crappy sounds, but it's mostly about sort of finding the keys and all the diamonds and so on. And not standing next to spiders. And bad jokes. Nope. And unnecessarily gory death scenes. Oh, that's fine. Much appreciated. I know how much poo you have to clean up these days. Oh, shit. That's how we do it. Pro skills. I did play Chucky Egg too, yes. I've actually got... Actually, it's not the... It's the first Chucky Egg on Atari ST in the bundle of stuff my parents brought me. But it's the Atari ST version, so it's all fancy and exciting. It's not that fancy and exciting, it's still Chucky Egg. Oh, shit. Yeah, I always used to like this type of thing as well. This is the sort of thing that you play on the old Atari computers. Things like Boulder Dash, that kind of thing. Right, so if that one goes there, that one can go down there. A lot of this is kind of, what's it called? Sokoban style puzzles, I think. So sort of pushing blocks around and making sure that they're not jammed into corners and that kind of thing. And then there's quite a bit of sort of timing based puzzles like this one as well. You got to jam the spider in there and that kind of thing. Yeah, some of them were pretty fiendish. I remember Boulder Dash was started off very easy, but then got incredibly difficult later. Yeah. Ugh. This game doesn't do much for my fear of spiders. If I met a spider that size, I think it's probably okay to be afraid of it, especially if it can sort of decapitate you. Oh, shit. There we go, much better. Oh, fuck that up. Let's give that another go. This first bit's pretty straightforward. There were loads of games like this back in the day. Quite a few on sort of consoles as well, I think. I want to say there's a game called Solomon's Key or something like that on the NES, I think. There was a bit like this. I might be thinking of something else entirely, but... No, I never heard of that one. What was it on? I remember there being quite a few games like this on the Acorn computers. There was one of my friends at primary school. His dad worked for Acorn, so he always had like the BBC Micro and the Archimedes and so on. And I remember playing things like Repton at his. That was a bit like this. Let's try not to fuck this one up. So 1, 2, there are 4 keys. We need 4 keys. Ah, fuck off. Yeah, Gauntlet was cool. I always liked Gauntlet. I only ever had the Atari 8-bit version of that though, and the Atari Lynx version. Both of those were completely different to the arcade version. They were good, but they were pretty different. Right, how the hell do you do this? Oh, derp. That's how you do this. And then you just have to negotiate the other spider. Oh, you fucking bastard. I will look that up afterwards. It sounds interesting. I don't remember it, but I will certainly have a look. Now, is there a way to get that boulder in the way of the spider? Yeah, that was always a really common thing, especially in sort of early exploration and platform games and that sort of thing. Some of the games I was looking at earlier back on the old Atari systems, you know, things like Load Runner that sort of had some early takes on artificial intelligence. So like they'd follow you back and forth, and that was absolutely revolutionary at the time because most games at the time just had, oh god, this looks like fun. Yeah, most games at the time just had enemies that were moving back and forth and in really predictable patterns. Yeah, when I think of that kind of enemy movement, I think of sort of old Spectrum games like Jet Set Willy and Manic Miner and that sort of thing. Things just moving back and forth across platforms and up and down and so on. Yeah, they tend to get mocked a bit these days when you find them in modern games like block pushing puzzles and so on. But they can still be fun. So I push that out the way there. Have I fucked that up? I might have fucked that up. I think I fucked that up. Okay. How does one suicide? F6. There we go. Right. Try again. Too late. Try again. That's where the lag doesn't help. So, hold on. No, you can't move that bottom one because you'd need to get the other stuff out of the way. And you need to push one of these to get in there. Right, push that up like that. No, don't think that'll work either, will it? Yeah, you're really helping. Oh, game over. Oh well, there we go. So that's that one. Let us move on. Alright, so what else have we got? Alright, got some Commander Keen. I used to like this one. This was sort of Apogee's take on sort of console style platformers. Especially sort of Super Mario type ones. It was their big mascot character. Can't remember what the controls are now. Alright, so that is jump. That is pogo. Admire those glorious 16 color graphics. So this is what the guys who made Doom and Wolfenstein did before they made Doom and Wolfenstein. So I find it quite entertaining to think about. And again, lovely old FM synthesis sound. Can't reach those. So I forget if there was actually anything you were supposed to do in these levels besides just clear them. I know in the one that came after this, Keen Dreams, you had sort of different things that you had to track down and collect. But I can't remember if you had to do so in this. I don't think so. I think it was just a case of clearing the levels, if I remember correctly. Oh, shit. That's right, and Keen's actually got a decent amount of mobility. Like, he can climb up on ledges and that sort of thing. It's just something a lot of platform game heroes couldn't do at the time. It was a thing that games like Prince of Persia and Flashback revolutionised in the first place, and then promptly wasn't used all that much by a lot of 2D platformers. Yeah, I like Flashback as well. That was one of those games that always got passed around among my group of friends at school. It was always like someone always wanted to borrow Flashback because like one of us had it, and someone always wanted to borrow it. Flashback was because there was another world first. That didn't have anything to do with Flashback, but it used the same sort of gameplay and animation style. And then there was Flashback, which kind of stood by itself. And then there was actually a sequel to Flashback called Fade to Black. That was on PlayStation and PC, and that was a bit different because it was sort of third-person over-the-shoulder view rather than a platform game in the same way. It was still good, but it was a very different kind of game, and it was very primitive 3D, so it was sort of early PlayStation era 3D, so it's not remembered quite so fondly these days, but I remember it quite a bit. My enduring memory of that one is having to escort a scientist, and he walked so slowly, and so every few seconds you'd run just a little bit ahead, and he'd be, "Wait, slow down, I'm an old man." But yeah, that kind of platformer was a bit of a fad, really. As you had Prince of Persia, you had Another World, you had Flashback, and then that was sort of it, really. There's a few sort of modern indie games that have kind of tried to take that same formula, but it's nowhere near as popular as it was for some reason. I guess because it was a lot of work to put together, because the whole thing with their animation was that it was all sort of, I think rotoscoping was the technique they called it, or something like that, where they filmed someone and then they basically drew over the top of the footage. Yeah, I played Spelunky. I played Spelunky before it was cool, don't you know? Yeah, back when it was sort of a pixel art game rather than the cartoony style it's got now, the original sort of freeware version, and then they completely revamped it for I think it was for the Xbox release originally, but then they brought that to the PC version as well. But yeah, that's a good game. There's a sequel coming out apparently as well in development. Oh my god. Yeah, so yeah, Spelunky 2 is on the way apparently. I don't know much about it, but I saw people saying quite excited things about it the other day. So something to look forward to. Yeah, it was a good one. I mean, I feel like I've kind of fallen out of love with the whole roguelike thing recently, or the whole roguelite thing, whatever you want to call it, just because there's been so many of them. But Spelunky is certainly one of the best ones, definitely. And it's got some really solid core mechanics, and it's fun to play, and it generates interesting levels, and it's got sort of plenty of meme-worthy humour in it as well, with things like the shopkeeper and that sort of stuff. But yeah, I just find myself preferring stuff that's a bit more designed, if you like, these days. sort of hand designed stuff, and it's nice to have essentially infinite replayability. But there's also something nice about just playing a level that's been designed properly. I'd say there's still some really cool roguelikes out there. I'm a big fan of Crypt of the Necrodancer is really good. That's not a platform game, obviously, but yeah, that's a really cool game, and it's got amazing music. Yeah, Dungeon of the Endless is really good, actually. I actually reviewed a game that was very much like Dungeon of the Endless recently, called Winged Sakura. It just takes a slightly different approach to it, so it's sort of like the same basic core gameplay of Dungeon of the Endless. It's sort of unlocking rooms and gathering resources and stuff. But they've made it so that the combat, rather than being sort of real-time strategy, is a bit more action-based. And it puts a nice little twist on the formula. It works quite nicely. Yeah, and FTL was really good as well, actually. I've not played that for a while. I was never very good at FTL though. I know Tom finished it a bunch of times, but I never quite managed to get to that final bit. Yeah, it's a good one. There's 3 Winged Sakura games now, and like I said in my piece, they've got sort of a bit of an unfair reputation based on the Sakura visual novels, which are nothing to do with them. So there's the what's it called? Endless. I've forgotten what it's called now. The Dungeon of the Endless one. Anyway, that's really good. And then there's I think the first one's just called Mindy's Ark or something like that, and that's a sort of a tower defense type thing. It's a bit like Plants vs Zombies. And then the second one is like a sort of really lightweight dungeon crawler, I think. So it's not like a full-on dungeon crawler with massive mazes and things, from what I understand. It's just sort of moving from room to room and dealing with encounters as you go through. That one seems to have been quite well received, but I haven't actually played that one yet. I own it, because I think someone bought it for me for a gift. I'm not concentrating at all. I think someone bought it for me for a gift at one point, but I haven't actually got around to trying it yet. But on the strength of Endless, whatever it's called, that's definitely worth a look. Because like the guy behind him, he's got a really nice art style. He's obviously got some decent freelancers working with him as well, and most of it is all the work of this one dude. So, and it's obvious that he's improved over time as well. So, like I say, it's just a bit of a shame that it kind of has its name besmirched by the Sakura visual novels. And I mean, there's nothing really that wrong with those visual novels in the first place as well. There's just so many of them. The one of those that I do want to try actually is Sakura Dungeon. That always looked like it was pretty good. It's got really good it's got really nice artwork in it, and I've always got time for monster girls. Like Dungeon Travelers 2 taught me anything. It's like dungeon crawlers with monster girls in are pretty great. And Dungeon Travelers 2 was just a great game anyway, but the fact that it had amazing monster girls in it just made it. Oh my god. Alright, well there's Commander Keen 4. Of many. 6, I think they're all together. Right, let's go for... Let's have a bit of Terminal Velocity. I've not played that one for ages. Lovely 90s pre-rendered 3D intro. I don't remember a ton about this game, but I remember people kind of accusing it of being a bit of a Descent ripoff at the time, which it wasn't at all, because it had lots of sort of flying around on the planet's surface as well as in tunnels. People just saw tunnels and decided that, oh, it's like Descent. I also remember liking this one because it had a mod soundtrack rather than the usual MIDI. And I think this was one of the first 3D Realms or Apogee games that got a properly enhanced CD-ROM version. So this pre-rendered intro wasn't in the floppy disk version. Whereas most of the time CD versions of a lot of their games were it was just the convenience of having it on one CD rather than loads of floppy disks. So I remember things like Duke Nukem 3D coming on CD and everyone was like, well, where's the CD extras? And it's like, well, there aren't any, it's just you're installing it from a CD instead. And it's like, would you rather have 12 floppy disks? I'm good. Terminal Velocity. But yeah, I do find it amusing. Having been looking back on sort of the old Atari computers recently since I got hold of them from my parents. Oh, let me check the controls before I do that. Afterburner Alt, Fire Space, AZ. Okay, easy enough. Yeah, looking back on the old Atari computers, especially the ST, I found it quite amusing that a lot of those games just came with an intro sequence on a floppy disk. In some cases, it was just completely separate from the rest of the game. In the case of sort of Psygnosis games, their intro sequence would take up the whole floppy disk. So there was things like Armageddon was a really good game that they made. So like the whole of the first disc of that was just a pre-rendered intro sequence. It didn't have any sound or anything because there wasn't space on the disc to do that. But and then I think there was Race Driving by Atari. That one didn't make you watch the intro, it just had a separate disc that had the introduction sequence on it that you could watch if you wanted to. And it was a really cool introduction sequence, to be fair, but it was extravagant. I don't remember what you're doing this now. I think you just blow this shit up. That's it. Follow the arrow and shoot things. Yeah, I remember this sort of style of terrain mapping was fashionable for a while. It was like Bullfrog did it with Magic Carpet, and then this did it, and then there was a game called Terra Nova or something like that. It's Terra Nova Strike Force Centauri, I think it was called. And that had this kind of terrain in it as well. I always wanted to play Terra Nova, but never got around to it because it was that kind of landscape, but you were on foot rather than flying over it, and I thought that was quite an interesting approach. Probably look very, very primitive now compared to something like, say, Skyrim or something like that, but still pretty cool. Like playing this game now, I just can't help but think of Ace Combat. It's because Ace Combat always has at least one ridiculous tunnel sequence. Yeah, I think the one in Ace Combat 5 is probably the best. I've only played 4 and 5 so far, but the one in 5 in particular is spectacular. Just because it's such a ridiculous thing. Like you're flying down this tunnel trying to stop a nuclear bomb going off or something like that, and there's a bit where you have to fly past your wingmate who's coming the other way down the tunnel, so you both have to sort of tilt sideways so you don't crash into each other. Insane. Such a good series. I'm so happy that it's coming back and very much looking forward to playing it in VR. Anyway, yeah, this game. So it's a pity the soundtrack is glitching out just a little bit, but you can hopefully get a feel for it. It's sort of digital noise tracker music rather than MIDI. It always gives it a very sort of Amiga style feel to it. We are mission complete. But yeah, literally I think the only reason people compared this to Descent when it came out is the fact that you're in a spaceship shooting things. It's sort of a first person shooter, and yeah, that's about it really. Because like when you go into the tunnels, you're flying down a linear path rather than exploring them as you are in Descent, and the rest of the time you're flying around this sort of, I don't know what you call this really, fractal landscape? Is it fractals? I don't know. If so, that's a nice little callback to Rescue on Fractalus from earlier, but not sure anyone was around for that. Never mind, I enjoyed it. Ooh, look at those bendy textures. Glorious old pre-3D acceleration 3D. There's a tunnel there. Oh, we can't go down that at the moment. Alright, fair enough. Oh, that's a thing there. Afterburner. That's right. So in this you could sort of explore a bit as well, and you could find some hidden stuff. You didn't just have to follow the arrow and shoot the things it told you to. This is a game that would really benefit from a good DOS flight stick though. It was an old Thrustmaster me and my dad used to use that was really good. We had that, and we had a throttle and a set of pedals as well. Right. I know you could use the stick with this definitely. I don't know about the other bits, but oh dear. Game over, no lives. Yeah, let's try that again. Yeah, this is a game I haven't actually played for years. I've had it in the 3D Realms collection for a while, but never really got around to it. I only ever played the Shareware version back in the day, and the PC I had when it was sort of current wasn't quite up to running it brilliantly, and so I never really looked into the registered version. But yeah, it's a fun game. It's another one of those ones that's sort of gone a bit forgotten by history. I was like, everyone remembers Duke Nukem and Wolfenstein, and to a certain extent Commander Keen as well, but this one, I was going to say, because I mean, I guess this one wasn't doing something that special, but this, like I was talking about before, this landscaping thing that it was doing, it was pretty unique at the time. There weren't that many games taking this approach. So we had Magic Carpet, we had Terra Nova, we had this. Probably some Flight Sims used it as well. Oh, I'm getting the absolute snot kicked out of me. Yeah, definitely. That old Amiga style soundtrack. This one would have probably been around the time you were on PC Zone, wouldn't it? I reckon. I think. You missed some stuff that would have been even more nostalgic earlier on. I was playing Rescue on Fractalus and all sorts of old 8-bit stuff, but you can probably have a look at those in the archives if you're interested, because I don't think anyone else was awake when I was playing those. Get off. Ah, you've been identified. From behind the veil of your anonymous username. I've still got a bunch of PC zones there, actually, all the ones that I did articles for, including the one I did work experience for. It's probably in one of those. So I remember it being around that period. It was definitely on the cover disc, at least once, as the Shareware version. Yeah, I mean, I was playing the 8-bit stuff around sort of 10 AM my time, so yeah, you'd have definitely been in bed at that point, I think. And you missed 2 hours of weird 2600 shit before that as well, including a game about eating pasta. Oh, yeah. No, proper Fractus, because I was just emulating it, because the getting the 8-bit hooked up to the streaming setup is a little bit fiddly, so I just emulated it, and I've only got emulated version of Fractalus. But yeah, I've got all, as you've probably seen, I've got all the old 8-bits and STs and stuff here now. So I've got behind Jaggy lines on a floppy disk somewhere, and that still works. Yeah, you've actually heard of that? I'd never heard of it before. The only reason I picked it is like in the database that I've got all my ROMs in. It just said the gameplay for this was described as bizarre. Citation needed. So I can't really pass that up, can I? But yeah, it's just a game about eating pasta and feeding it to a dog and a cat. And that's all the game is. And people would have spent money on that. Yeah, you're right, this does kind of go on forever, doesn't it? Shoot this, now shoot this, now shoot this, now shoot this some more. Shoot this thing as well. Also shoot this thing. Yeah, I think that's the problem, is that it spends like 3 levels on one planet, and that whole planet looks the same. It's all brown and green fractal landscapes. I think that may be where some of the criticism came from. So, all right, let's switch to something else, shall we? Let's go for a bit of Rise of the Triad. As I've always felt, this is a bit of an underrated first-person shooter. Again, this is one that was timed quite badly. Because again, this sort of came out around the time of Doom and such like, and it had a relatively primitive... Oh. Cat sitting on my controller. There we go. Oh dear. Let's turn off the joystick. Yeah, I always used to like this one just because it was so silly. I mean, it's obvious that at one point it was supposed to be serious, and it was sort of, there's the whole thing about it being a Wolfenstein sequel and so on. But yeah, then they decided to go, what the hell? Let's give you a bazooka right at the beginning. And have stupid jump pads everywhere. Boing! Oh, and weird console game collectible things all over the place as well. Yeah, the interesting one about the Shareware version for this is that the Shareware version, it wasn't a case of it being just the first episode. So the Shareware version of this was a completely different game pretty much. Obviously it was the same type of game, but all of the levels in the Shareware version, they weren't in the full version. So it was almost like the registered version was like a sequel to the Shareware version, if you like. And if you've not tried it, the remake of this from a couple of years back is actually really, really good. It sort of stays true to the style of this while updating the graphics to be a bit more modern, and obviously the engine. So you got a game that looks like a modern first-person shooter but plays like this. It's kind of a different approach to what they took with the Shadow Warrior reboot as well, which is also well worth a play if you've not played it. Those are both excellent. But yeah, Rise of the Triad is basically a sort of remake of this, and it works really, really well. Hard as balls, though. Again, being pretty true to the era, though. Yeah, I mean, it's even got a multiplayer mode and stuff. I don't know how many people are playing it still, but it'd be interesting to give a go sometime. We can't shoot through obstacles in this one. This isn't Lakestone. Hooray for auto aim. And God mode, this was the best. Alright, all this stupid stuff was kept in the remake as well, so there was still God mode and there was Dog mode as well, which is exactly what it sounds like. So, I feel like this was a game that kind of embraced its gaminess a lot more than some of the other shooters around the time. So obviously the engine was much more primitive than things like the build engine and the even the Doom engine. But yeah, it's not trying to be realistic at all. It's just trying to be fun. It's just trying to give you some stupid mazes to find your way around, filled with stupid enemies and ridiculous power-ups and things to collect. And that's why I used to what things like a score up at the top and all these angst to collect and lives, and yeah, I forgot you had lives in this. And like the things to collect, I say they're console style because it's like the old favourite of you collect 100 of them, you get an extra life, because of course you do, because that's how these things work. It's just not something you're used to seeing in a first-person shooter. Health. Yeah, the reboot, if I remember, was made by Interceptor, who they've got something to do. They're not the same as 3D Realms, but they've got something to do with 3D Realms, I think. They've certainly worked alongside them on a few things, I think. I forget the exact connection between the two of them, but yeah, they know their stuff from this era of shooter, certainly. Oh. Let's do better. This was, I think, one of the first-person shooters to have actual projectiles as well. I think Blake Stone that we played earlier had one gun that did projectiles, but for the most part they were all hit scan weapons, like they were in Wolfenstein. But yeah, there was a very strong focus on the sort of launcher weapons in this one. Ow. That was stupid. Yeah, a machine gun, that will help. Yeah, this one I think when people talk about Bobby Prince's best work on Apogee games, I think this is the game they're generally thinking of. And again, it's not terribly complicated compositions, but they work well for what they do, and they make sort of good use of. This is one of the first Apogee games that made really strong use of wavetable sound cards, so things like the All-32 and the Gravis Ultrasound and so on. So I remember hearing this soundtrack for the first time on a good sound card other than the ad-lib, and it sounded great. So obviously we're used to our full cinematic orchestral masterpieces now, but it's still a pretty great soundtrack. And the nice thing about the remake as well is that they've used a lot of these old compositions, but they've sort of remastered them, brought them up to date with sort of full instrumentation and electric guitars and live percussion and that sort of thing, and they sound really cool. So again, it's another way that they managed to make the remake feel very true to the original. I'm going to die again, aren't I? Pretty sure there's some health back at the start of the level. There's some. Anyway, better than nothing. Ooh, excuse me. Oh. Well, fuck you. This is what I get for sticking rigidly to my play it like an old arcade game rule. Maybe I should start using quick save. Let's see how far through the level we can get with God mode on. There we go. That's how we do it. Oh, that's right. That was this game's claim to fame, wasn't it? It was the first person shooter where you could fly. And I use that term loosely. And they mean it was the first person shooter where you could hover and sort of walk on thin air. Look at the distortion on that engine. This was like a prototype of the build engine, as I recall, so it was prone to the same sort of problems that build had. So like, main issue with build was when you looked up and down, it didn't really take into account perspective correction, so all the vertical edges would remain vertical, even though when you actually look up and down, that's not really what happens. Yeah, well, that thing does. It might just be an extra life or something. Not sure how we get in there, though. So a lot of the secrets in this one rather be based on push walls like they were in Blakestone and Wolfenstein. A lot of them are touchpads on this one that you stand on. And you can actually see the touch plates if you look closely. They're sort of little flashing circles on the floor, but they're very subtle usually because they're sort of semi-transparent. They're quite tricky to spot sometimes. There's dog mode up there. How do we get to that? I think we need to jump from somewhere. He be up here. Oops, missed. What am I standing on? Barrel. Barrel. I think I killed him by jumping on him. Didn't actually know you could do that. Knock that off. I remember I always kind of wanted to try the multiplayer in this one because it was around the time when multiplayer was pretty much only a sort of local area network thing, but there were some interesting sounding modes in this. There were things like, there were sort of combat free ones where you had to go around and collect things. There were sort of shiny objects around the level that you had to go and collect and get more than your opponents. And then there was a version of that where they had guns in it as well, so you could shoot each other as well and sort of nick each other's collection. But like I say, because this was from an era where multiplayer was pretty much only a local area network thing, it was not something I ever got the chance to try, which is a bit of a shame. I vaguely remember trying to get this working over a dial-up modem connection with a friend at school, but I don't think we ever succeeded. We certainly never succeeded getting Quake running with through a direct connection like that. I think we might have got Duke 3D working, but I think in the end, if I remember correctly, it was just proved to be such a faff to do that at the time that we just ended up getting the N64 version and playing it split screen instead. Ooh. Death. I forgot they can have rocket launchers as well. Oh, I know how you get dog mode. You need to use this flying, don't you? So if we hop up there like that and just kill who we can from up here, we can then just, there we go, dog mode. It's like God mode but better. Yeah, one of the best power-ups, that. Just a bit of a reminder that an awful lot of first-person shooters these days have kind of lost that sense of fun and ridiculousness about them. I know we've still got stuff like COD Zombies and that kind of thing, and Borderlands is very good for a bit of silliness, but stuff quite like this is a bit thin on the ground these days. Oh, dead. Right. Okay, so for comparison's sake, this is kind of slightly breaking the schedule I had in mind for today, but I've got time to do it, so let's take a quick look at the remake, if I've got it installed. And if not, I will start it installing, and then we can try it as soon as it is installed. Rise of the Triad, where are you? Seven gigs. That's not going to be ready anytime soon, is it? Anyway, it's definitely worth a look. We'll see how long that's going to take to download. If it's practical to squeeze it in before we move on to something else, we will give it a go. If not, we won't. Tell you what I do quite want to play in the meantime, that won't take very long to install at all, is... Where is it? Tyrion 2000. This is an old Epic Mega Games release originally, if I remember rightly, but it's been passed around a few times over the years and eventually became freeware, which is cool because everyone should play it because it's amazing. Look at that, 16 megabytes, beautiful. Yeah, so did I. Again, this is another one that I only had the shareware version of back in the day. Living in the UK made it a little bit awkward to get a hold of a lot of shareware versions, of registered versions rather, just because most of them were mail order, so you ended up having to sort of post checks off to the States and that kind of thing. So